My name is Jonathan Atkinson. I've been involved in campaigning around climate change and environment for many years. I've got a background in ecology, and I am part of a cooperative in Manchester called Carbon Co-op, and another called People Power Retrofit. And I'll be facilitating the session tonight. And we're joined by three fantastic speakers who've got a depth of experience and knowledge of this kind of area from all different perspectives. We have Zoe, Kevin and Phil, and I'll introduce them as we go. This evening, the focus of this evening is climate conversations, and we intend to do just that, to talk about climate change, discuss it. We're going to be talking not only about the issues and the problems, but how people can get involved, how they can begin to act together, how we can act together and individually to tackle this issue. And we'll be thinking about how people can be involved, but also how people can deepen that involvement. And hopefully it'll be an evening where, yes, there'll be troubling aspects and obviously a shared challenge, but also hopefully points where we can find, shared collective action together. And part of the theme for the evening is resilience and resistance. So it's kind of both building and resisting kind of issues that we're going to be talking about.
So I called this talk The New Denialism, which is actually the name of a chapter I wrote in a book that Greta Thunberg edited last year, the climate book. That was the chapter I wrote in there. And the subtitle for this is Choosing Between a Velvet and a Violent Climate Revolution. And I'm going to try and explain why I think it's come down to that position. It is revolutionary change and the options that we may have within that. And this is based on work that I've done with a number of colleagues over lots of years, and particularly Dan Calvary and Isaac Stoddard more recently, those two anyway. I'm going to start off with this slide, which almost looks a bit flippant, but it's not meant to be. So the climate doesn't respond to good intentions, to Machiavellian policies, to eloquent arguments, legal niceties, promises of tech tomorrow, or accountancy scams. And in accountancy scams, I very much include net zero 2050. That is an ultimate accountancy scam. All of this is trumped by the brutal beauty of the physics. Now I say that, it's pretty obvious, but that's what we've tried for 30 years. So that's what we've been doing for 30 years, and it has failed. But let's not pretend that these are just little asides. This is what we've spent almost all of our effort on, at a collective level anyway, certainly at the senior level, for 30 years on climate change, and the physics hasn't cared. So what is it we've committed to? So I'm going to start, so this is quite a brief talk, I've tried to condense a lot in here, so if you want to ask some questions about this later, please feel free to do so. So what have we committed to? Well, I'm going to take the Paris Agreement here as the starting point, and that built on lots of things that went on before that. And in the Paris Agreement, we're probably all quite familiar with this now, we've promised to keep well below 2 degrees centigrade of warming, ideally no more than 1.5. And these are very significant changes in the temperature that we've not seen in any modern human time. So these are, even 1.5 is a massive shift from any norms that we've seen throughout the last, well, not far off a million years. Guided by the science, and also very important here, is the basis of equity. It's embedded in every agreement going back to 1992. Every annual agreement, equity is in there, and we ignore it. The rich countries ignore it every single year. Since Paris, there's been quite a lot of data that's been gathered, and empirically we can see some of this anyway, about what are the impacts? What do they look like they're going to be at 1.5 compared with 2? And I think it's fair to say now we're much more concerned about the impacts of 1.5. And so in many respects, 1.5 now, I would argue, is the more appropriate threshold between acceptable and dangerous climate change. But 1.5 itself is deadly to many people around the planet. So let's not pretend it's a safe threshold. The global north may get away with it to some degree, but many people around the world will suffer severely at 1.5 degrees centigrade of warming. It gets much, much worse at 2. So then, we have that as our backdrop, what we've signed up to. We've signed up to that in every agreement, including the Glasgow COP and so forth, where it reinforced 1.5. What does the science tell us? The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change data, particularly from Working Group 1, that's the main science part of that. What does it tell us about the timeline that we have to address these challenges? Because I think the timeline is where we really need to be focusing much more on the near term, and I'll explain why that's the case now. What is evident from repeated science, going right way back to 2013 or so, when one of the assessment reports in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change assessment report 5 came out, right way through to the latest data, it says that if you're concerned about temperature, what matters is the total build-up of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, what we call cumulative emissions, or we use the language of a carbon budget. So we have a certain amount of CO2 we can dump in the atmosphere, and that basically means a certain amount of fossil fuels we can burn, and a certain amount of methane and other gases we can emit from agriculture. So it gives us a budget to work within, and that's what matters for temperature. Not some long-term target, net zero 2050, 2045, 2060. That's irrelevant from a temperature point of view. From a physics point of view, it's the total amount of greenhouse gases we dump in the atmosphere that matters. And the latest report, Assessment Report 6, climate change is full of jargon, unfortunately, and to deliberately keep people out of it. So Assessment Report 6 lays out what are the size of these budgets. So if you want to stay within 1.5 or 2 degrees centigrade of warming, and from 2020, it gives you a nice big range of numbers here. Billions of tons of CO2 you can put in the atmosphere, and I'll make some sense of that in a minute. So it gives us some clear idea of what size the budget is for different chances of staying within these temperatures that we've committed to. But that was from 2020, and if you update the budgets to now, then you get very, oh actually this is just last month, so and I'll show you how important a month is in a minute. If you want to aim for 1.5 degrees centigrade, a flip of a coin chance, so not a good chance, and I would argue anyway that the budgets in the IPCC are actually quite optimistic. So this is the most space that we have from an emissions point of view. Then we can emit about 350 billion tonnes. That probably doesn't mean much to many of you. For 2 degrees centigrade, it's a bit more than double that. Just to give a feel for what that means, at current rates of emissions, remember emissions are going up globally every year. At current rate of emissions, if they remain static, that's 8 years of current emissions. And we blow through a 50-50 chance of 1.5, which is pretty poor chance of it. And we're about 18 years globally for 2 degrees centigrade, for a reasonable to good chance of 2 degrees centigrade. If we were to reduce emissions now at a set percentage every year, that's 11% reduction every year at a global level for 1.5. At a global level, that's China, India, Rwanda, as well as the US and the UK. If you go to 2 degrees centigrade, far more impacts, much more devastating, but the rate of reduction is nearer 5%. That is still way above anything that any country has achieved. And globally, even during COVID, we didn't manage 5%. Another way to think about this is that every month, where we keep emitting like we're doing today, we use up 1% of the budget. Not every year, every month. 1% of the budget for a 50-50 chance of 1.5 we use up. And we use up about half a percent of the 2 degrees C budget every single month. So that shows how important each month is, not this 2050 rubbish that we hear normally. I would, in my view, I don't know how we can deliver this. I think we can deliver 2 degrees centigrade, but so we should be aiming for this still. This means this is death for many people in the southern hemisphere and destruction of many ecosystems around the planet. So we should be trying to do everything we can for this. But just look what it means. It means by the very early 2030s, we should be zero emissions in the wealthy parts of the world. 2030. That's what, less than 10 years from now. That's what comes out of lying and delusion for the last 30 years. This isn't a shock. This is what comes out of what we've chosen not to do for 30 years. So, 2030. And it looks a bit, some people say that's a bit unfair, that blue line in the developed countries. But remember, 18% of the world's population live under the blue line, 82% live under the orange line. So this embeds ongoing unfairness for the poor parts of the world per person. So this is not a fair way of looking at it. Basically, if we want to have any chance of 1.5, and this is a slim chance anyway, we're talking about zero fossil fuel use by 2030, 2035 for the wealthy countries, and the poor countries have some leeway of 5 to 15 years, depending on where you are, 5 years if you're China and 15 years if you're Rwanda. So you have a bit of leeway on this. You can then sort of say from this, well, what does this mean for the UK? So we can give some guidance to the UK government what this looks like. And you get a load of numbers out of this. So you get a carbon budget for the UK, how much can the UK emit, how many fossil fuels can it burn basically. And for 2 degrees centigrade, you've got about 8 years. For a 50% chance of 1, you've got 3 years. At current levels, 3 years of current emissions will blow our fair contribution to a 50-50 chance of 1.5. If you look at the reduction rates, that's over 20% per annum for 1.5. Over 20% per annum, as an average. So, poor people living in Cheetham Hill won't have to reduce as much as people in Wilmslow, nothing like it. So there is that, and I'll come back to that, it's massively important. If you draw straight lines, the UK needs to be zero fossil fuel use by 2030, and a massive change in agriculture as well. So that's another important part of and 2039 2 degrees centigrade. So this is all a far cry from the net zero 2050 nonsense, which is now just taken over the language. No one can talk about climate change without talking about net zero. For about 5 years, and virtually no one talks about net zero. Now everyone talks about it. Universities, the academics, the journalists, civil society. It's just nonsense. Every one of them. Right? All of these charlatan countries or governments, they're also all looking for more oil and gas, and they're all signed up to net zero 2050 or something approximating to it. So anyone can sign up to net zero by 2050. It is totally and utterly meaningless when you get this lot signed up to it. But when you get people like the UN Secretary General, this is a great statement by him. He's actually been very strong in his statements. Today, fossil fuel producers and their enablers are still racing to expand production, knowing full well that this business model is inconsistent with human survival. Now, he's not saying that everyone will be killed, but he's saying that nothing like the world in which we live today would exist. There'd be a huge, let's be brutally on that, there'd be a lot of deaths if we carry on burning the fossil fuels like we are today, and destruction of ecosystems, and all the other systemic ecological challenges that play out from that. It's not just about climate. Climate's just one small aspect of this. In a real world sense, net zero is a scam, and the sooner we start to talk about it as a scam, the better. Remember, we've got to be zero emissions fossil fuels by 2030, 2035, which tells us something about what we need to think about for the election for next year. This isn't about waiting until 2030 to 2035, it means being zero by then. So basically a straight line from now till then. So it tells us a lot about what's going to be important over the next year. And currently the two main parties are basically they're both adopting the same sort of 1970s approach to this sort of stuff. So if we were to respond to Paris, I reckon there's a two-phase approach to this. The first, and as an engineer I left it like this, you do need lots of technology. But the technology is about deployment, not about some exotic technology in the future, which just is delaying technique. It's about deploying the things that we have today, and sort of thing that Jonathan and others are involved with. We're talking about a Marshall-style plan, something as big as that, like the reconstruction of Europe after the Second World War, even larger than that, but without the political agenda that was there. It's the rapid deployment of existing technologies. So if we think about that, it's make existing homes efficient, retrofit. Make sure that all new homes are zero energy for heating. Look at the new ones being built up the road from here. They're not anything like that. They're just, again, designed for the 1970s. Rapid rollout of public transport across all socio-economic groups. EV charging potentially in rural environments, but I wouldn't put it in the urban environments. Some of it, but not a lot. I think the idea of owning electric cars is slightly less worse than owning petrol cars. If everyone has one privately, we have to rethink that model. A rapid shift to zero carbon electricity, massive amounts of electrification. Only 18% of the energy we consume in the UK, what we call final energy consumption, only 18%, 1/8, is actually electricity. The rest of it is basically all direct use of fossil fuels. And a deep and rapid reduction in aviation, because there's no technical way out of that. Even the aviation industry accepts that. If you go to their conferences, there's no way out of the aviation emissions at the moment without reducing demand, massively reducing demand. And for shipping, there are some technologies out there. Slow steaming makes a big difference, just going slower. I used to work on ships years ago, and we used to travel typically in a container ship then at 14 knots. This was back in the late 70s and early 80s. I did my apprenticeship in shipping, and now we're traveling at 24 knots. So, far, far more energy as a result. Climate emergency. My guess is probably if we come tonight, we probably think we are, but many people don't still. Then if we were in a climate emergency, and we require the top 10% of global emitters to reduce their carbon footprint to the level of the average European EU citizen, actually. So, not exactly, it's not going to solve the world's problems, and the EU citizen isn't deeply impoverished. I mean, it's still a reasonable level. And the rest of the world's population, the other 90%, made no change from their current emissions. That alone would be a 1/3 cut in global emissions. It just shows how the emissions are massively skewed to small groups, and there's rates of information about this now. But even the IEA produced a report this year, a commentary this year in February that showed this. But then Thomas Piketty and Lewis Chancellor have been doing this good work. Will Lamb and Julie Steinberg have been demonstrating the same thing again. The maths just tell you this sort of result. Why has equity remained taboo? Why do we never talk about equity? We talk about carbon capture and storage, geoengineering, sucking CO2 out of the air, we talk about lots of renewables, nuclear power, EVs, all this other stuff, but never equity. Now, well, who builds the models? Who builds the models about what we need to do about climate change? Who develops those scenarios? The politicians, the economists, the financiers, the CEOs, the professors, the modellers, the journalists, the heads of NGOs, the billionaire celebrities, all of whom are in the top 1% or clamouring to get there. So not surprisingly, the whole agenda that is normalised, the mainstream agenda around climate change, is dictated by the people who are in the top 1%. And not surprisingly, they don't want to bring up equity. They're eager to sell a future of perfect green technology and carbon taxes that would reinforce the status quo, because of course they can afford the carbon taxes. And by doing that, you avoid asking uncomfortable questions about power, about distribution, about fairness. So where does all of this leave us? Well, I think we're going to face, and this is a deliberately simplistic view of this, that we face revolutionary rates of change, if you like, velvet or violent ones. I see no way out of this now, and we've left it so late. There are no non-radical futures. The future will be radically different from the present. I've been saying this for quite a while. I think we'll start to see some of that playing out now. The choice is between, and a simple way to look at this, a sort of deep, rapid and fair decarbonisation of modern society, an organised-ish velvet revolution, borrowing from the breakup of Czechoslovakia, which had been a deeply authoritarian society and actually managed to morph to something quite different, democratic structure and so forth, without lots of heads being chopped off. So it's that sort of, we could do something about it if we were serious about this. That's not saying it's going to be easy. There are lots of people who won't like this. There will be lots of people in power we'll have to take out of power and other people, maybe with some integrity, taking over. Or we can carry on, business as usual. Ongoing lies, rhetoric, delay, and temperatures will keep going up. And what we'll have then is not sort of an organised revolution, but we will have revolutionary scales of change that will be chaotic and violent. And they'll be chaotic and violent for everyone. The rich think they get away with it. They may be temporarily, but they quite quickly won't. So we'll all be in this. At the same time, we're seeing ecosystem collapse for many other reasons around us as well.
Okay, so reality is real. If you're a bit of a doom scroller climate geek like me, you'll know that we've, on top of what Kevin's already said, we've hit something like 1.8 degrees so far this year already. We've had mind-blowing, record-breaking temperatures, June, July, August, the hottest September ever, I think. And huge marine heat waves all over the world, including around the UK. Thank you. Including around the UK. Really, really scary. And the lowest level of Antarctic sea ice, I think, ever in the modern record. So reality is unfortunately real, despite what our politicians and others say. So a little bit of audience participation, because I don't really like being up here, I'd rather be together. When you think about reality, how do you feel? What words and feelings come to mind?
Overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed, thank you.
Scared.
Scared.
Anxious.
Anxious.
Bleak.
Bleak. Angry.
Disbelieving.
Disbelieving.
Unheard.
Unheard. Oh my goodness. Thank you. Yes to all of the above and more besides. We're all feeling this, aren't we? We're all in it. And there's loads of important facts and science, as Kevin's outlined, and many more besides, and I'm sure our collective wisdom in this room is huge. And yet it's our humanity that matters, really, isn't it? It's what we feel and what we do that really makes the difference. There's lots of different words and terms that different people are using, different clever people. The great simplification, degrowth, the great unravelling, choose your term, it almost doesn't matter. We just have to be honest about where we are, don't we? We have to be really, really honest with ourselves and with our kids and with our communities, because it's time to decide who we are. Every generation before us has had its challenges. Perhaps our grandparents or maybe our parents or family lived through the Second World War and the other challenges that maybe our families in different countries have experienced or are experiencing right now. I know my heart's breaking over what's happening in Israel and Gaza right now. But this is our generation's challenge. This is what we're here to do. We're here to face this reality and tackle it together. And there's great joy and great fulfillment in doing that. We know we've been lied to for so long, and telling the truth is now a radical act. As a couple of little stories, like my other half was due to go and stay with a really good friend who's just moved to Aberdeen, but all the trains are cancelled because part of North East Scotland's now on red alert. Red alert. We don't ever have red alerts in this country. It means imminent loss of life. Risk to loss of life. Scotland. They're facing up to a foot of rain, like in this next 24 hours. Thankfully, his friend is not in the community that's been told to evacuate, but he's right near it. And they've been being given sandbags. They're half a mile from the coast, and the sea spray is hitting their window already. It's terrifying. Terrifying. He's got 2 young kids. I don't know about you. You can probably tell from my accent, I've grown up around different bits of Greater Manchester in the northwest for most of my life, and Stockport originally, and I live in Warrington now for 20 years. I've worked in Merseyside, so I've been all along the River Mersey for most of my life, different bits of the River Mersey. And in June, without knowing it, I experienced or came across mass fish death. I don't know if anyone else has had first-hand experience of seeing mass fish death in our rivers and canals. It was all over the country this year. It hardly got a headline. It's absolutely horrifying. Absolutely horrifying. But this isn't just about extreme weather events, is it? Because actually, as we live through this great unravelling, or the foothills of collapse, as I kind of prefer to call it, our lived experience for most of us in the UK, not maybe in the sharp end of the global south, where it hits them right full in the face, but our lived experience is more likely to be the cost of living crisis and the economic and social impacts as society unravels, and our government helps it to unravel. There's all sorts of economic impacts which we're not told about either, are we? If you read this stuff, there's a fantastic economist called Professor Steve Keen. I'm another big fan of his as well. And he's done a study recently on the pensions industry. Forget pensions in the long term, I can tell you that for sure. They listen to the mainstream economists who've lied as well. And I'm not sure if they're lying or they're stupid or both, but they didn't include climate risks in economic forecasts in the pension industry. So, good luck with that. So, yes, we are facing, as a peer-reviewed paper called The Future of the Human Climate Niche set out a couple of years ago, we're facing, in the lifetime of my daughter, I have a fantastic, amazing, beautiful 20-year-old daughter, and in her lifetime, by 2070, peer-reviewed science tells us that we're facing between 1 and 3 billion men, women and children who will be outside the conditions that humans have been enduring and thriving throughout human history. So that means horror and mass migration, mass death, mass suffering on a scale that humanity's never experienced. And I don't know about you, but I'm not okay about that. I'm not okay about that, and I'm not okay about it being done in our name, which is what this government's doing with its 100 new oil and gas licenses. So for me, one of the hardest questions that we can be asked now and in the years to come is like, Mummy, Daddy, Grandma, Grandpa, what did you do once you knew? What did you do? This is about very much, it is about science, but even more than that, it's about our values, our humanity, who we are as people, as mothers, fathers, grandmas, grandpas, aunties, uncles, citizens. We're not just consumers, we're so much more than that. We're living, breathing, feeling people. And right now, this government is violating our values right, left and centre. With its cost of living crisis, its greed, its obscene policies, and its obscene plan to knowingly pursue acts of mass death through its fossil fuel licensing, when it knows, as Kevin's laid out, it knows we've got alternatives, it knows it doesn't have to do this, it knows all its lies about energy security are bullshit, but it's continuing. And I'm not okay with that, and neither are thousands of other people. But it's easy to feel really powerless about this, and as Kevin's kind of alluded to, civil society, which is kind of like a title that climate people give us, like ordinary people, we're civil society, I think, aren't we? We're it. It's easy to feel really powerless and unheard, as you said, sir, and all these other feelings that we all have, but my goodness, we're not. We are so, it couldn't be further from the truth. And just by way of more audience participation, Hands up, has anyone seen anything in the media or social media or stuff that you hunt around on Facebook or elsewhere about what the incredible, beautiful people of the Netherlands have been doing? Yeah? Yes. So about 20% of you, I think, maybe, which is good, but it would be really wonderful if it would be 100%, and hopefully it will be soon. 27 days, continuous, peaceful blockading by thousands of people, ordinary people from the Netherlands, blockading the A12, the major arterial road towards in The Hague. So it's huge political importance. And they've been doing that by peacefully occupying, standing on, dancing on, celebrating on, sitting on the A12, day after day for 27 days. Some of those days they had 25,000 people at a time, with full orchestra, full choir, beautiful, beautiful scenes. I know, incredible. I mean, this thing can be joyous, right? Resistance is really fun. And they did, sometimes it was hundreds of people, but in total they had 9,000 arrests. 9,000 arrests. And they've paused now, they've stopped for now, because what happened was the police unions in the Netherlands went to the government and said, you need to negotiate with these people because we can't cope with this anymore. They were overwhelmed by the sheer force of beautiful human non-violence. Thank you, and that's why you haven't heard about it, because we have got so much power. Those fucking bastards don't want us to know. I'm sorry for my language, but it's so true. They don't want us to know. Because when thousands of us, mum, dads, grandpas, students, young people come together, we can force great change, because those people of the Netherlands were demanding an end to fossil fuel subsidies. The obscene billions of euros that the Netherlands government is ploughing into fossil fuel subsidies every year. And through that 27 days, and those arrest after arrest after arrest, they were water cannoned by the police. Obscene, these peaceful people water cannoned. But they kept on coming back, and that determination and love, plus they don't have the Murdoch media in the Netherlands, that helps, but they had this reaction from the police unions, and actually the politicians have put forward to their cabinet that they actually have a motion against end-to-end fossil fuel subsidies. So they've actually passed this motion now, and they're progressing with exploring a policy to how that can happen. So it's not over till it's over. But my God, that's what you can do in 27 days. And what they've said very clearly, XR Netherlands, who are the fantastic people behind the action, is that if the government doesn't deliver, they're going to be back on the road. Now that's how to do it. We can do this. We can do this. The joy and solidarity and power and empowerment is truly incredible from taking action. And I must stress, this is non-violent. So as Kevin said, we are facing revolution. There are no non-radical futures. Just look at what's happening around the world. There is no non-radical futures. We either face violent breakdown of our society, or we come together in love and non-violence and force change before that happens. That's the choice. That is our choice. So that's why I've been in civil resistance for almost 5 years now, why I keep going, despite it all. And I keep going because there are other incredible people, thousands of incredible people in the movement of movements, whether it's Extinction Rebellion or Insulate Britain or Just Stop Oil or other movements around the world, the global north and the global south. But Just Stop Oil, as you probably know, we demand an end to new oil and gas and coal in the UK. And we've been going for about 18 months now. We've had incredible impact, incredible success with a pretty small number of people. And we're heading towards the next stage of their campaign, which is marching in London, in the streets of London, absolutely non-violently from the 29th of October. I don't know if any of you saw Chris Packham's documentary on Channel 4 about 3-4 weeks ago, or maybe a bit more than that now. Is it time to break the law? Hell yeah. Wasn't his conclusion great? It was so good. It's so time to break the law. It's past time to break the law. I mean, just look at the facts, right? It's way past time to break the law. And I've been doing this for quite a long time with some of my lovely colleagues in the front here, Elvis and Paul. Paul from Extinction Rebellion and Elvis from Just Stop Oil. And personally, I've been arrested 7 times now. I've had a brief stay in prison, obviously been in police cells as well. have been remanded, have a suspended sentence for carefully breaking windows at Barclays Bank in 2021 at a global HQ for calling them out for being the biggest fossil fuel country in Europe. Thank you. I don't say that for any aggrandisement or anything like that. I'm a completely ordinary mum, as my daughter will attest. I'm a completely ordinary, flawed parent. And I just don't expect anyone else to do this for me. So when I get people saying, oh, well done, keep going, I'm like, it breaks my heart. It's like, who do you expect to do this for you? We've got to do it for ourselves together. We've got to do it for our self-respect, for our children, for our families, for our communities, for the yet-to-be-born generations. We've got to do it. There's no one else. No one is coming to save us. We have no choice, because this is the rest of our lives now, because reality is real. As Kevin said, as my cup would smash on the floor if I dropped it, reality is real. We have no choice. Even if we did get to net zero, it's nonsense, isn't it? Even if we did stop all emissions now, we would have worsening impacts for a couple of decades at least before things even began to stabilise. That's even before you start talking about the oceans releasing heat and all the other planetary boundaries that we haven't even touched on. So we have to be real. This is the rest of our lives. And as someone who has Jewish heritage, I'm also bloody well terrified about fascism. And we have more than creeping fascism already in this country, let's be honest. So we have to fight repression and fascism at the same time as forcing mitigation and adaptation and resilience in our communities. We have no choice. We have to have resilience and resistance. They must come together. We have to resist and build resilience and cohesion in our communities. So the call to action I make to all of us right now, including ourselves and all of you beautiful people here this evening, is give up 3 or 4 days of your life, get trained in non-violence, come down to London, march on the road to the point of arrest at least once, go home and then get on with your life and be bloody proud of yourself. Thank you.
Zoe, you said you're a big fan of Kevin's. I'm a big fan of both of yours. So I'm actually kind of completely in all of you both now, and I have to go last, and I'll do my best anyway. So thank you to you both. So I would like to start my talk about climate by talking a little about the imagination and why it feels so vitally important when we talk about the climate crisis. The transition movement started in 2006 as an experiment to see if there was something that we could do in our communities to respond to climate breakdown, and it's based on the idea that if we wait for governments, it will be too late. If we act as individuals, it will be too little. But if we act as communities, it might just be enough. There are now transition groups in 50 countries around the world, in thousands of communities, and it is about doing something where we are, with what we have, with the people and the resources that we have. Somebody once called transition hope with its sleeves rolled up, and I really, really like that. As Kevin has talked about, we're in a climate and ecological emergency, and this is all accelerating incredibly and quickly now. Last summer we saw temperatures of 40 degrees in the UK, far ahead of anything that was expected to be happening. Globally, this year has been even more extreme. 2023 will almost certainly be the hottest year on record, and we've had deadly heat waves on almost every continent. We've had severe flooding in Europe, the Middle East, Asia, America. So this is something where the urgency is acute. Based on the teachings of David Holmgren of the permaculture movement, there are 4 places that we can go from here. The first is what he called techno-explosion, where people go and live on Mars and they somehow use lasers to shoot minerals that will lead to asteroids, and everything will be fine. The second is techno-stability, which is the idea that we can maintain a business-as-usual growth-based economy, but we just have to run it all on solar panels and green energy, but unfortunately that doesn't fit with the physics of what nature is calling for. The third is collapse, which a lot of people are talking about as being almost inevitable now. Collapse being the worst-case scenario as far as human society is concerned. But our work in transition is really focused on the energy descent pathway, which is the light blue line. And this is that there is a way that we can massively reduce our levels of consumption and move away from our growth-based high fossil fuel way of living to a different way of doing things which is more resilient and more based on well-being, care and connection. But we will only do that if it feels like a move towards something irresistible and delicious and magnificent, rather than feeling like we're being dragged away from something that is completely irreplaceable. So we need to change our expectations and change our cultural stories of the future. The Institute for the Future in the US has this great saying which says, any useful statement about the future should at first seem ridiculous. And after decades of procrastination on the climate crisis where any policy put forward is probably not ambitious enough, we need really bold reimagining of things, and we need to be as ridiculous as we can be. A lot of the work that we're doing in the transition movement at the moment is based on this rather wonderful Black Lives Matter t-shirt which says, I've been to the future, we won. And just in case you don't believe me, here is Rob Hopkins from the Transition Network at his Totnes space station, returning from the future and confirming this for us. Now, we're not for 1 second saying that everything is going to be fine, because the science clearly isn't saying that. But what I do wonder is if our activism would feel like, I do wonder what our activism would feel like if instead of talking about collapse and extinction, we also gave people something delicious to run towards. By the way, I asked Rob to take a picture of Market Street in New Mills on his time travels, and this is what he sent back for us. This is a picture from the US in the late 1960s when people went to the beach in the car. And the beaches often looked like this. Shortly after this picture was taken, something changed where the idea of going to the beach in your car changed. And I can guarantee that there would have been people saying, but I can't imagine not going to the beach in my car. The fact that some people can't imagine something is no reason why we shouldn't do it. Recently we've seen many headlines like this, saying that any chance we've got of staying below 1.5 is now finished unless we see a rapid transformation of society. But I didn't see one newspaper or magazine or politician saying, do you know what, that rapid transformation of society, that sounds quite good, why don't we give that a go? And it feels like that we're only going to do that if we can cultivate longing in society for a different kind of future. And at the moment, quite often, we see this image almost as a sort of banner for the climate movement. This is the front cover of Greta Thunberg's book, and it represents the average global temperature year by year. It is a grim picture, and it is a terrible banner to mobilise a movement around, because as a story, you can't cultivate any longing around it. And so I was wondering whether we could make this something that we could long for more deeply. One of the problems that I think we have in 2023 is that our collective imagination has been so deeply undermined. And this is important because we can only rebuild the world if we can reimagine it first. Marianne Carver, the US activist, says that we live in a system that has been locked into a sense of false inevitability. The Newsweek article pictured here was about research into the imagination, and it showed that our creative capacity rose until the mid-1990s, and then it started to collectively decline. And this matters because if we can't see beyond what is in front of us, if all of the organisations that should be making the changes can't see beyond doing what they've always done, then we have got a real problem. So how do we cultivate and nurture a longing for a low carbon and a very different kind of future? So this is something that I wanted to share with you today. And it's called the Imagination Sundial, and it was designed in collaboration with the Donut Economic Action Lab, and it is something that we've been using in the transition movement for quite a while. And it offers us a framework for boosting our imagination. And I'm going to pick the 4 headlines here: space, place, practices and pacts. And I'm going to show how we've used those in New Mills over the past few years. So the first of these is spaces. We all know that the times when you're at your most imaginative is when you've got space to do so. Albert Einstein said that he got his best ideas when he was riding his bike in the forest. That space for us to daydream is really important. This is the Cambridge Imaginarium, a place where they ask, how might our cities and countryside look? How will we play? How will we work, travel, grow our food and build our homes? How will we learn, stay well, spend our free time and be creative. And I think we need more public spaces like this where people can come in and play and be imaginative and daydream and to create a longing for a different kind of future. This is all part of what I would call climate infrastructure. And any movement that hopes to bring about radical systemic change needs to build its own infrastructure. And in this infrastructure will be embedded the values and principles of that movement. I'm thinking here particularly of the working class movements of the 19th century, who built publicly owned libraries, hospitals, schools, markets, trade unions, transport systems, shops, sports clubs. The majority of this has either now been dismantled or is in the process of being dismantled. And it feels like one of our tasks is to rebuild this again. Repair cafes, community energy projects, climate cafes, climate emergency centres, hubs, assemblies, sustainable travel, growing spaces. And we need to find a way to network all of this so that we can support each other, we can learn from each other, and we can share skills. We need to scale up our work and start to aggregate all of this together. We are only going to do that if we can leave the safety of our silos and learn once again how to truly cooperate, how to talk to each other, how to solve problems, how to solve conflicts, how to have difficult conversations. So don't get stuck into thinking that things have to be the same as before. Don't think that they will inevitably get worse. If anyone tells you that a different future is impossible, ask them why. Is it impossible because of the laws of physics? Or is it impossible because of the rules of society, the stories that we tell ourselves? And this, I believe, is how we rebuild our societies out of the ashes of a world that no longer exists. This is how we begin to tell a new story that places care, mutual aid, and community at the very heart of them. This is how we build a more beautiful world that our hearts know is possible. I'm going to leave you with one final quote, which I think is absolutely wonderful. If you want to build a ship, don't divide the work and give orders. Instead, teach them to yearn for the vast and endless sea. And that feels like the task in hand for all.